Dear students, welcome to the class. Open your textbook, take page number 112. Let's discuss an inspiring short story or an anecdote with the title The Serang of Ranaganji. The Serang of Ranaganji is an anecdote or a real short story authored by one of the most renowned and popular storytellers of the 20th century, Dr. A.J. Cronin. Dr. A.J. Cronin was a Scottish or a British novelist, dramatist, and a non-fiction writer. He was a physician or a doctor by profession. He practiced as a doctor over a decade before devoting himself entirely to writing. Cronin produced several best-sellers or best-selling novels, drawing from his own experiences as a doctor. So here too we have such a real story or an anecdote based on his own experience as a doctor in the British Navy, in the Royal Navy of Britain. So I said that this chapter titled Serang of Ranaganji is an anecdote. A-N-E-C-D-O-T-E. What is an anecdote? Anecdote is actually a real story, or it is a short story based on true incidents from author's life, or it is a record of real incidents involving real characters. It is presented as a recounting of real incidents involving real characters, or author talks about his past in an anecdote. Commonly, anecdotes are thought-provoking in nature and convey a powerful message. So here too we have such a kind of a thought-provoking and an inspiring anecdote. This chapter, The Serang of Ranaganji, is actually an extract or an excerpt taken from Cronin's autobiographical novel titled Adventures in Two Worlds. So it is an extract taken from his own autobiographical novel. And of course, it is an anecdote based on his experience as a doctor or a physician of the ship named Ranaganji. The ship which was owned by British Navy. So he was a physician of the ship Ranaganji, which was owned by British Navy. And the story is based on his experience as a doctor of that ship. The story is set during British rule in India or before India's independence. And it is about a voyage. It's about the voyage of the ship Ranaganji from Liverpool. Liverpool is in England. So this is actually the story about the voyage or the journey of the ship Ranaganji from Liverpool to Calcutta during British rule in India. And this story tells how the author is Dr. A.J. Cronin, and he is a speaker of the story. And the story tells how our author and the hero of the story manage a calamity silently and bravely. Even though the speaker of the story is A.J. Cronin, he is not the actual hero of the story. The hero of the story is Serang of the ship. What is the meaning of the word Serang? Serang or quartermaster. Serang is actually an Indian word which means Serang. A Serang is the senior-most crew of the ship, senior-most deck crew who is in charge of the Lascars of the ship. He is a supervisor of the Lascars of the ship. Lascars meaning Kappal Jeevanakar. Kappal Jeevanakarude Indiyakkaranaya Talavan. Senior-most deck crew or the supervisor of the Lascars. Lascar is actually a worker who do small petty jobs like loading and unloading the baggage of the passengers, etc. Okay. So Serang is actually a man who is the person who is in charge of the Lascars. So he is an Indian. Serang is an Indian who is the head of the ship crew. Head. Okay. Head of the ship crew. Senior-most deck crew. Now let's consider the word Ranaganji. Ranaganji is a name of the ship, isn't it? According to the chapter, Ranaganji was a stout, old tub meaning ship, manned by white officers with an entirely native Indian crew. Which means the officers, the chief officers of the ship were Englishmen, but the crew, Jolikar, the crew were Indians. And the author, our author, was a physician in charge of the ship. He was the only physician of the ship. And do you know the name of the Serang of the ship? His name is Hassan. And Hassan is a hero of this story. Hassan, who is a Serang of the ship, is a hero of our story. Now, Ranaganji was actually a passenger ship. And the passengers were tourists. Passengers of this ship were tourists and Anglo-Indian army officers and their families. Actually, the story tells how our author, Doctor, who is in charge of the ship, A.J. Cronin, and Serang, the hero of the story, how both of them together are going to manage a crisis. How they are going to manage a calamity. The calamity is an outbreak of an epidemic called smallpox. How they are going to manage this bravely during the voyage of the ship. The story is set during the British rule in India, before India's independence. The Serang of Ranaganji set in the erstwhile colonial phase tells a story that appeals to the contemporary scenario, that is, the world battling a potential pandemic, COVID-19, through the superhuman and selfless service rendered by doctors, nurses and health workers. We are battling a crisis, isn't it? A pandemic and epidemic, with the help of doctors, nurses and health workers. So when we come to the story, the entire chain of incidents in the story take place within a ship. Within the ship Ranaganji, that is sailing from Liverpool to Calcutta, and Hassan, the Serang, shines out to be the hero who personifies the virtues of selfless service and ultimate dedication at work. When it comes to the unanticipated attack of smallpox on board, outbreak of smallpox on board, Hassan displays superhuman willpower and practical wisdom as an experienced seaman. However, the bitter irony of the situation lies in the fact that the very same story of Hassan's humanitarian kindness begins and ends with the snobbish passengers poking fun at the native features and appearance. You could see two first-class passengers making fun of his native appearance. Who are the two first-class passengers making fun of our noble Serang? A lady named Jobsmith, who is a social promoter of the ship, and her boyfriend, Cronin. Miss Jobsmith was the chief of the social promoters. She happened to see our Hassan Serang, who was a quartermaster of the ship. He was very busy. Hassan was when the ship is about to start its voyage. Okay. And Hassan was very busy loading the baggage of the passengers. She amusingly noticed the ugly appearance of the Serang, who had short legs and a large disproportionate head. And she spoke insultingly to Hassan. She said to her boyfriend that, "See, look at this ugly old fellow. Looks hardly human." And her boyfriend agreed that that dear old Darwin was not altogether wrong. Madam Jobsmith, or Madge Jobsmith, was over 30. She was from Cheltenham in England. She was a thrusting person, and she was always in a dashing style and looked very young. According to our author, she was a snob and an assertive, bored character. She was very active in the celebrations on the board, or she was a social promoter who was there to lead all celebrations inside the ship. So she made fun of Indian Serang, and she described Hassan as an absurdly comic creature, and her boyfriend Cronin agreed, saying, "He looks hardly human. Darwin was not altogether wrong," etc. So Hassan, his appearance was a little bit squat and having short legs and a large head. His voice was hoarse but very steady. So now the ship started its voyage. They crossed Bay of Biscay, the Mediterranean Sea, and the weather was very fine and pleasant. Lots of activities were going on inside the ship. Merrymaking was going on inside the ship. Of course, the passengers were the tourist pleasure seekers, Anglo-Indian Army officers and their families. So from the first day onwards itself, there was tremendous enjoyment and merrymaking and gaiety going on board. Chief among the social promoters was our Miss Jobsmith, the woman whom you met at the beginning of the story. Okay. Now the ship was on its voyage. On the second day of the voyage, Hassan brought two of his lascars. He was in charge of the lascars of the ship. Okay. Hassan brought two of the deck workers or lascars to the consulting room of A.J. Cronin. A.J. Cronin, our author, is a physician in charge of the ship. So he brought two lascars to the consulting room of the doctor. And the two of the Lascars had symptoms, രോഗലക്ഷണങ്ങളുണ്ട്, symptoms of a very dangerous epidemic, smallpox. What were the symptoms? Intense headache, racking bone pain, they looked frightened, fevered, thickly furred tongues, palpitating fingers, and small nodules on the skin. These symptoms were actually the symptoms of a very deadly epidemic, smallpox. And our doctor, who was very young and inexperienced in the profession, was startled. And he was the only physician of the ship. He immediately informed this news to the captain of the ship, Captain Hampel. Captain of the ship was a very strict disciplinarian, just and fair-minded personality. He asked Dr. Cronin to manage the issue himself. So the Captain asked our doctor to deal with the situation entirely on his own responsibility, because he was the physician in charge of the ship. And Captain was not at all able, he was unable to give any of his officers to help him assist our doctor, because he was overloaded and understaffed. So he asked the doctor to manage it himself. But he was ready to give the Serang of the ship to assist him, as he was the finest man inside the ship. And also, Captain asked doctor to keep this issue as a big secret. The matter should be kept with utmost secrecy. Why? Because the two men had contracted with such a deadly epidemic, smallpox. പകർച്ചവ്യാധിയാണ് smallpox, വസൂരി. So the matter should be kept with utmost secrecy. And Dr. Cronin, who was so much inexperienced and young, he was very upset. And the situation was rather very serious also, because it was an outbreak. It was an outbreak of smallpox. And he was the only physician in charge of the health of the ship. And he had only Hassan to help him. Now, they were in the middle of the Arabian Sea. There were 1,500 passengers on board, on the ship. So what shall they do? How could they control the disease from spreading? No way to vaccinate them. He was to stop the disease from spreading. And the news should be kept as secret. Otherwise, it could create a big panic among the passengers. Therefore, Cronin asked Hassan to isolate the patients. There was no particular room to keep the patients. How could they isolate them? Hassan was bold and confident. Within an hour, Hassan prepared a canvas shelter on the afterdeck. കപ്പലിൻ്റെ ഏറ്റവും മുകളിലത്തെ തട്ടിലെ പിൻഭാഗത്ത്. He created a canvas shelter on the afterdeck of the ship. Okay, and the patients were kept there and Hassan attended them. The two patients were admitted there. He created a beautiful canvas shelter. The next morning, he brought 3 more patients into the shelter. By evening, the number increased to 10. Hassan helped the doctor to sponge the patients, nurse the patients. He also set up a secret cooking area inside the canvas shelter. So Hassan nursed them alone without taking any rest. And Cronin was surprised at his sincere service. And our doctor was tired with heavy responsibility. See, the nearest port was 8 days away. In order to shift the patients to a hospital, they will have to reach a port, isn't it? And the nearest port was 8 days away. And what helped our doctor was Hassan's presence of mind. They were to attend 14 patients by that time. Now they had 14 casualties of 14 patients who were affected with this deadly smallpox. Unfortunately, 2 of them died. Hassan is going to cremate them. See? Hassan wrapped their bodies in sailcloth, chanting passages from the Ramayana. He buried them under the sea. Our author wondered at the sacrificing attitude of this little man, this small person. See, Hassan was actually a Muslim from Punjab. Later, his parents moved to South India. There, he became a sailor for 40 years. He was on the ship Ranaganji for 15 years. He had no family or friends. He was unmarried. He had no property. Money had no interest for him. He never thought of tomorrow. He had courage, self-control and faith. According to him, what is the use of money to a person who has all he needs? He was satisfied with the things he had. He was very simple and down to earth and was ready to help anyone at need. Also, you could see he did the funeral ceremony, isn't it? He wrapped the dead bodies in cloth, tied a weight at their feet. He read a passage from Ramayana, and at night he threw the dead bodies into the sea. A week passed. The ship reached the port of Colombo, Sri Lanka. The remaining patients were recovering and they were transferred to the hospitals in Colombo. The remaining patients were taken to a hospital. 3 of them were in a serious condition, helpless and unconscious. Hassan himself carried them in his own arms. Hassan carried the people who were suffering from smallpox in his own arms. When he was carrying them, taking them to the hospital, he was in tears. He was in tears when he carried them in his arms. Thank God, no more fresh cases were reported. The epidemic ended there. Now the story is reaching to its climax. Miss Jobsmith enters again, the lady whom you met at the beginning of the story. Yes. The ship left Colombo and reached Calcutta. Hassan was unloading the baggage of the passengers. Cronin also was standing on the deck of the ship. Suddenly, Cronin heard a voice from behind. "Oh, look, look, Ronnie, look. There is that absurd creature again." That was the irritating sound of Madam Jobsmith. Of course, Cronin knew it was Miss Jobsmith. The huntress, Vetakari. Isn't it? The huntress from Cheltenham. She was behind our Hassan. She turned and asked Cronin, "Oh, doctor, where did you keep him during the entire voyage?" "In a special cage. You kept him inside a special cage," this lady asked our doctor. "എവിടെ കൊണ്ട് അടച്ചിട്ടു ഇവനെന്ന്? ഈ മൃഗത്തെ എവിടെ കൊണ്ട് ഇട്ടു? ഒരു സ്പെഷ്യൽ കേജിലാക്കിയോന്ന്?" ആരെക്കുറിച്ച് ചോദിക്കുന്നേ? ഹസനെ കുറിച്ച്. Cronin was silent for a moment, thinking of the nobility of the Serang. Then he gave a reply. He said, "Yes, in a cage. It was a cage. But isn't it clear, Miss Jobsmith?" And the animals were all outside. Animals were outside and he was inside. Quite unfortunately, the story ends with the very same circle of passengers mocking at Hassan, a real gem of a man. They never get to know that the same squat, ugly seaman was the one who nurses back to life the passengers who contracted smallpox and who almost reached death's doorstep. It is our doctor who closely witnesses the warmth of Hassan as a human being and his efficiency as an experienced seaman. And see, our doctor, though he was young and inexperienced in his profession, he was very precise in his diagnosis. But except for the precise diagnosis, doctor owes everything else to Hassan. Doctor owes everything else, be it the effective containment of the epidemic or the maintenance of the secrecy, entirely to Hassan. And the narration of the story is done through the perspective of doctor or author himself. Evidently, the story Serang of Ranaganji deals with the theme of appearance versus reality. Theme of appearance versus reality and juxtaposes supreme nobility, nobility of Hassan, juxtaposes supreme nobility and worst form of meanness, meanness of Madam Jobsmith. Story juxtaposes supreme nobility and worst form of meanness that erupts from human heart. Okay, I hope the story is clear to you. Read the story and try to complete the activities.